a quick flick through this little box, which has got most of my 7-inch spoken word, mostly spoken word poetry records in. Dylan Thomas reading Poem on His Birthday and Other Poems. It's a Caedmon record. Caedmon issued these smaller records, but also issued a lot of his poetry on LP record as well. And the first two are very famous poems: Fernhill, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, and some of his lesser known poems. Yeah, Oh, If I Were Tickled by the Rub of Love, another very much loved poem, one of my favourites. Nice little record. A French record, which I've used several of these records to make some of my animations on my YouTube Poetry Reincarnations channel. And I don't know if I've actually used this one or not. I'm not a French speaker, but if I see a French record going cheaply, a French poetry record, I get it. But I've got most of the readings of Charles Baudelaire that have been put onto record, that are the ones that are worth having. Jean Cocteau. Plain Chant Fragments. Right, that's that one. You've seen the LP version of this one. This is a selection of the tracks from the LPs. Palgrave's Golden Treasury. You saw the first the big records in the my first little compilation from the box one. Claire Bloom reading Milton, Wordsworth and Shelley. Another Caedmon record. Very nice readings, and Claire Bloom had a lovely voice for reading poetry. Pasternak, a Russian poet, if I'm not mistaken. And these are readings, if I'm not mistaken, I think by his sister. That's right, translated and read by his sister, Lydia Pasternak Slater. I think I don't know if this is record 1 or record 2, but there's 2 of these. I've only got the 1, I think, at the moment. Another French poetry record, Chenier. Poems. As I say, some of these I use for the if I can work out, so I'm not a French speaker, if I can work out what to do with them, I'll use some of the tracks for the animations I've made on the other channel of mine, Poetry Reincarnations. I've done a lot of Baudelaire and various other famous French poets. Baudelaire being my favourite, all-time favourite French poet. David Lloyd. I recently put this one up on my on this channel. Played you the tracks on it. Annabelle Lee. It's my favourite on this record. Got the 78 version of that as well. Lovely record. And you've seen the Owen Brannigan records. Also up on Video Curious. Right. What are they now? They're EMI records. Just put that down there so I don't drop them. These are sort of something slightly outside of my usual area of interest, but I saw it going quite cheap. I think I need 99p or something on eBay, so I bought this one. William Blake. He's definitely not outside of my interest, but I'm not really into these sort of new age jazz, type albums that use classic poetry. But not a bad album. I can't read through this lens. I See Thy Form and a Poison Tree. Settings of William Blake by Mike Westbrook. There we are. Close up so you can see what it says on that. Right. This is a monologue, really. It's a quirky little monologue. I don't know, I think Geoffrey Woodruff was probably a radio personality, a British radio personality. But this is Geoffrey Woodruff live. An entertaining demonstration of local accents. And he was Geoffrey Woodruff was born in Clifton Road, Bristol on the 25th of October 1919. Educated at Bristol Cathedral School, he currently teaches French is the author of a French textbook and broadcaster in French. Oh, that's how he's known, yeah, through BBC Radio. But it's an entertaining discussion by him of local accents in the Bristol area of London, of Britain, west of England. Oh, George Buchanan, one of those sort of poets who got recorded in the 60s. Not quite as well known as Ted Hughes, but it's a sort of a school of poets. Poets reading. Can't quite read that faded white writing underneath, but there we are. I can't say it was particularly inspiring to listen to, but once again it was going cheap on eBay. I thought I'd add that to the collection. This one's a lovely record. It was put out by, as I think, to raise money for the St John's Ambulance Brigade in Norfolk, and has a, I can't remember what the poem was now, but it was a very nice reading of something by one of the local characters. He just on the spot sort of reads part of a poem. It's really nice. The St John Ambulance Brigade, Norfolk. Colin Hammond, Michael Lloyd Owen. So it's a bit of a sort of a discussion, and as I say, there's a little bit of poetry on here as well. It's quite a nice little record. The First Christmas. Picked this up with a load of records in a charity shop, and they were selling 10 records for £1. So there was no loss to be had, was there? I had to pick them up. I nearly broke my bicycle getting them back in the back of the basket. The First Christmas, Dame Edith Evans and the Chorleywood College Blind Children's Choir. Nice cover, isn't it? HMV Junior record. I'll have to make a little video of this record and share it with you. One of the Argo records, one of the small 7-inch versions. A lot of these poems were issued on the LP records as well. Love poems. Read by Tony Church, Derek Godfrey, Peter Orr and Gary Watson. 4 of the greats of the Argo array of actors who did readings in recitals of poetry. That's the selection on here. Another Dylan Thomas. Fern Hill. Reading Fern Hill and other poems. So we got Ceremony After a Fire Raid, If I Were Tickled by the Rub of Love Again, Lament, There Was a Saviour, Poem on His Birthday. So it's quite similar to the other record, isn't it? It's probably the same tracks, but issued, it seems, under a slightly different title. The amazing Edith Sitwell. Very strange looking lady, wasn't she? She was a real... she took a lot of the poets who became famous under her wing and sort of encouraged them to write their poetry, and she helped them. She came from quite a wealthy family, and she had this very strange appearance. She was very tall, and it was something to do with something like a pituitary gland or something that made her grow rather tall and rather gaunt, and she had this strange look to her, and that's why she always dressed in strange exotic clothing. She said, I'd probably frighten people if I dressed conventionally, she said. That was in her face-to-face interview, I think it was, on the BBC. Fascinating lady. Another one of those Cademan records. Another one of these records I picked up in a charity shop. 10 records for £1, so there's no way I wasn't going to leave this one behind. And Evening Hymns, the choir of King's College, Cambridge. Director David Wilcox, an Argo record. Another French record, Rousseau. Quite rare on this side of the water. I don't know how common these are over in France, but to buy one of these over here is quite hard to find. I think I bought this in a collection of French 7-inch records. Chateaubriand Memories of d'Outre-Tombe, Fragments, Pierre Fresnay. Probably mispronouncing it all. Runsard. And the intention was, I've used several of these already to make animations. The intention was to use some of the soundtracks for making, you know, animations for the Poetry Reincarnations YouTube channel I have. This is a whole collection of these little gala records, 78 records. We've got various, the Selma players and singers. I bought the whole collection, it was only going for a couple of pounds or something, so I bought all this little collection of nursery records, nursery rhymes. There we are. Ah, Napoleon Bonaparte. Bicentenary de Napoleon Bonaparte, the 45 disc. Evocation of the Emperor. I won't try to interpret the rest of these phrases. Una, Sera and Lumio. Once again, the plan is at some point to maybe try and reincarnate Napoleon for my Poetry Reincarnations channel. Don't know if I ever shall manage it or not, but it was the intention. Poems of Childhood. It's a lovely Argo record. As I say, many of these have been issued on the larger 33 RPM records as well. Got Andrew Marvell, William Blake, William Wordsworth, Walter Delamere, The Sleeper, Emily Bronte, W.B. Yeats, and readings by Prunella Scales, Peter Orr. He has a lovely voice, Peter Orr. He's a real stalwart of the Argo catalogue. Frank Duncan, George Rylands, another one of the stalwarts of the big people behind the Argo label. Gerard Manley Hopkins, Frank Duncan. Right. There's a very rare record issued in about 1969 by the Tennyson Society, and it includes all those tracks that you can see I've scribbled on the cover there. These are reissues of his Wax Cylinder recordings. There's a couple more that are available on different records and other places, but this is the bulk of the recordings that have survived of Tennyson. Oh, there's a sort of jazz poetry type thing, which slightly falls outside of my general interest. Oh, Christopher Logue, that's why I bought it, yeah. Now, I met Christopher Logue in about 1998, it might have been, or somewhere around that time, at the British Library when I was recording a series of 6 readings on Sunday mornings at the British Library, organised by Michael Horowitz. And when I first arrived, there was Christopher Logue and Michael Horowitz sitting down at a table with Dave Russell. Had a little chat with him. Interesting guy. Famous for his translations of Homer's Odyssey, and a real sort of pioneer of sort of the British poetry movement. Recently passed away a few years back now. Christopher Logue with the Tony Kinsey Quintet. Beautiful record, this one. Sir Michael Redgrave. What a voice that man had. Beautiful poet, beautiful voice for poetry, and one of the definitive readings of Elegy written in the Country Churchyard by Gray, Gray's Elegy, and the amazing Dame Flora Robson, who had a very sort of sad voice and lovely voice for Christina Rossetti. I always thought she really read that sort of Victorian poetry very well. Sir Michael Redgrave and Dame Flora Robson read English poetry. Thomas Gray, Elegy in the Country Churchyard. Money by William Henry Davis. Daffodils, Dame Flora Robson. John Milton at a solemn music. And William Shakespeare sonnet. That time of year thou'st in me behold. unusual little label, this one. I can't quite read it, but you can no doubt see it on the screen. Stanley Holloway, who came from East London. He came from Manor Park, London, E7, if I'm not mistaken. No, E12, London E12. So about 5 miles away from where I'm actually making this video. And he's reading W.S. Gilbert's Bab Ballads. It's volume 1. Caveman record. Yeah, Stanley Holloway had an amazing career making records of monologues and poetry and musicals, and he's probably best remembered these days for playing Alfie Doolittle in the Audrey Hepburn version of My Fair Lady, that lovely movie with Rex Harrison. You know, Over the Gate, Bernard Miles, another one of those characters who made lots of records, reading monologues. If you can hear crackling, it's because of the rain on the loft window where I'm making this video. This has not gone scratchy all of a sudden. And Over the Gate, Me and Old Charlie, one of the old school, Billy and Toggy, Bernard Miles, great character. Like Stanley Holloway, made quite a career for himself, making records as well as his acting career as well. Now, I'm not mistaken, this is probably a 78 record. I'll have a look on the other side in a second. Oh, I know, I bought this because it's narrated by Marvin Miller, who had a great voice. He's most famous for being the voice of Robbie the Robot in Forbidden Planet, that famous movie from the 50s. But he had a beautiful voice for reading poetry. This might be 16 2/3, I'm not sure. Let's have a look. Let's open it up. Oh no, it's looks like they are 33 1/3 RPM. Or it might be a 45, I'm not sure now. Anyway, Packy the Runaway Elephants. Another one of those Paul Graves Golden Treasury. John Neville, this is the readings of John Neville. That's from the larger LP album. Waller, Go Lovely Rose, Milton, On His Blindness, Burns, Oh, My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose, Keats, Shelley, and Matthew Arnold. Another French one, Lamartine. Beyond Le Grand Testament. I think a lot of these came in one batch, you know, so I bought the whole lot at one go for a few pounds. Quite hard to find good readings on the internet of French poetry. The best readings, some of the best readings I've ever heard of Baudelaire are from the actual Baudelaire website. That rather contradicts that idea. You couldn't find good readings, but certainly with Baudelaire there's a fantastic website that also has the English translations as well, several versions in English of the poems, and issues a lot of MP3s of the readings of classic readings as well. This may be the same as that one I showed you a minute ago. It's Edith Evans again. Maybe a second copy. I think it's probably a second copy of what I showed you before. The First Christmas. That I bought by mistake because it looked like a poetry album, but it turned out to be some sort of fairly recent pop thing. One day I'll have to put it back up on eBay. Oh, the HMV sampler, which I've shown you on my video that I made about the series of records of the Pattern of Poetry. This was the sampler record. I've got several copies. Oh, Border Ballads, there we go. Read by C.R.M. Brooks. Clark Saunders, Lament of the Border Widow, Thomas the Rhymer, Get Up and Bar the Door. Lovely record. Scottish poetry. Oh, Paul Verlaine. One of those interesting records that were sort of put out in the 60s, really, of English poets, British poets. A sequence for Francis Parkman, Donald Davy. Little booklet inside, listen books. The Marvel Press. Probably the most valuable of the Marvel records is the one with Philip Larkin. There was one of those up on eBay. Started at 99 pence and ended up selling at 250 something pounds. So I'm not sure if this one's as valuable as that one, but it was. I bought it. I thought it would be interesting. I must admit I'm not that enamoured by the poetry, but an interesting record to have as an example of that sort of period in the 60s when the new poets were coming through, and you know, he would have been a new poet back in the 60s, or new to record anyway. Another one of those French ones. Got some heavy rain outside, you've got a bit of a clatter on the loft window. So you've got a few French records. Verlaine, Baudelaire, Apollinaire, Rimbaud. Arthur Rimbaud, the boy poet. Dorothy Parker. It's quite a hard one to find. One Perfect Rose and Other Poems. This is the all the recordings that Dorothy Parker made of her poetry. The longer version, the LP record, has a reading of a story as well on side 2. But this is the poems that she recorded. Lantern Records, the Laurence Olivier. Can't go wrong with Laurence Olivier. And it's the Pied Piper of Hamelin. Let's take it out of the cover. And that's what it is, both sides. It's probably a 30, it's a 45 RPM record. Nice little record, nice little reading of the Pied Piper. A Child's Garden of Verses by Robert Louis Stevenson. Animals and Birds, Let's Pretend, Old-Fashioned Children, read by Muriel Young. A Delsey record. That's the lady herself. Famous acting duo, Sybil Thorndike and Lewis Casson. Jupiter recording. I've got pretty much most of the poetry that we'll put out on Jupiter and its sister labels. This is one of them. A poetry reading by Sybil Thorndike and Lewis Casson. And you can see that the recordings were directed by V.C. Clinton Badley and Edgar A. Vetter at 22B Ebury Street, London, SW1, autumn 1959. It was a really special building, that street in Ebury, that building in Ebury Street. A really sort of, I don't know if it's Art Deco or Victorian or something. It's a really unusual building if you look it up. It must still be there to be protected. They recorded all sorts of what did he do? He wrote to lots of famous acting types and asked them would they like to read poetry, and that's what happened. You know, got all the names along and they read great poems. This is another one, Big Ben's Minstrel Show. The Big Ben Banjo Band. I've got a lot of 78s by Big Ben Banjo Band as well. So these are probably reissues of those. I think they're sort of 1950s recordings mostly. There's a bigger version of this, an LP version of the Baudelaire Rimbaud, Le Poète Maudits, Jean-Louis Barrault. An Animal Bubble Book. This is a 78 record, which I think I've put up on the Video Curious channel already. These are little tiny records, very early recordings ready for children, little tiny, almost CD size records. In a little booklet. I can't really show you the record, you can see the record there anyway. I'll put that there and keep it safe.